You have a right to be racist. Believe it or not, that is something that is actually protected under the Constitution's First Amendment freedom of speech. You have the right to say things which are otherwise heinous. You have the right to deny the Holocaust, for example. You have the right to call Israel a settler state. You have the right to spread blood libel, myths about the Jewish people, and many other different things which we consider to be absolutely heinous and which we certainly should not do as a matter of politeness, respect, and morality. The point of the First Amendment is to defend your ability to say things which everybody hates, not to defend your ability to say things which everybody loves or which people are indifferent to. The United States Congress has recently passed a bill which, though I am a great defender of Israel and the Jewish people, and though I take very much pride in my own Jewish heritage, is ultimately, despite its efforts to try and protect the Jewish people from hate speech, going to be a violation of that First Amendment right to freedom of speech, just as all hate speech legislation is. We're going to talk more about that here today on The Watchdog. I hope you guys enjoy this program. Shalom, friends, and welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. Let me get a little bit better of a look there on the camera. Welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you once again that we are living in biblical times. Want to go ahead and give a shout out to anybody who's in the live chat, though actually you're not going to be watching this live per se because I am pre-recording this as I have to work today. But nevertheless, if you are here in the live chat during our premiere, I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much, and God bless you. If you're watching this after the fact, thank you for being here as well. If you're here, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Hit that bell to get notified every single time that we go live. And please do consider following us over on the Rumble account. Rumble is very important because, number one, in using Rumble, you are fighting back against the big tech overlords and those who wish to police our speech online. Number two, by subscribing to the Rumble channel, you are going to have access to episodes of this show, which are actually taken down off of YouTube. We've had a couple taken down for quote-unquote medical misinformation. I think considering the rather sensitive nature of today's subject, it's possible that this video could end up getting taken down, though we'll see. Excuse me. So if you want to get episodes of this show that end up getting taken down, the best way to do that is to subscribe to the Rumble account at TheCynicogue, and you'll be able to get access to those things. The third thing that makes Rumble very important is it is possible, though it hasn't happened yet, that this entire channel could end up getting removed from YouTube. I don't think that that's going to happen anytime soon, but it certainly could be the case. It's obviously happened to some political talk show hosts before us. Now, granted, while I certainly support them, it is true that Gavin McInnes and Alex Jones and others are a little bit more controversial than I am, hopefully at least. They also happen to be right about a lot of things, so, I don't think that necessarily matters. And they have a right to say what they want to say. All that being pushed to the side, though, the point is YouTube does not like political content. Specifically, it does not like conservative political content. And so it is at least on the board that this channel at some point gets removed from YouTube. So if you want to have access to the channel in the event, hopefully the unlikely event that happens, please do consider subscribing at TheCynicogue to the Rumble channel. I know it's not TheCynicogue News. Rumble, unfortunately, will not allow me to change the name, and I was originally going to make that a backup for my other YouTube channel, but it is just TheCynicogue. You'll be able to find it. I have faith in you. Please remember to follow us on various social media platforms. I am on Facebook, Twitter, Gab, Minds, Truth Social, MeWe, and Telegram at TheCynicogue. Certainly appreciate anybody who is supporting us on any of those websites. And of course, if you are frequenting those websites, please consider sharing this video to those websites. I greatly appreciate that. Also, it's very difficult to do these special reports because I work on Wednesdays. So we were going to try and do a special report yesterday. We could not. I am going to pre-record a special report at some point talking in full about this Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. I'm actually going to read the entire bill. So hopefully that'll be posted next Wednesday. And hopefully I'll just be able to create a backlog of these because there's so many other special reports I'd like to do, such as on the plight of Messianic Jews in Israel, such as on the World Council of Churches union with the Catholic Church that it was started in 2018, the World Alliance of Religions for Peace, the dedication of a new temple, a Mormon temple in Rome, which was done under the blessing. If that's a way, I don't know. I think it's not a coherent sentence, and I'm just making it less coherent by thinking about it. But anyways, the Pope in Rome actually dedicated a temple, a new Mormon temple in Rome, about 2019. I want to talk about the Amazonian Synod. I want to talk about the Sino-Vatican Provisional Agreement of September 2018. There's so many other special reports we want to get to, but the next one is going to be this Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. Hopefully it's going to be next Wednesday, Lord willing, and I want to try and pre-record it the way we're doing this today so that I can actually get that to you guys. The other thing is this video will probably be slightly shorter than usual. I have to work in an hour and 4 minutes, and it takes me about 20 minutes to walk to work, 15, 20 minutes to walk to work. So this will probably end up being a 45-minute, 50-minute long video. I already started it later than I intended. Busy guy, unfortunately. And so this will be a little bit shorter than usual, more than likely. Today is May the 9th, 2024, and we're going to skip our This Day in History for sake of time so that I can jump right into the articles. But I do want to go on a brief aside that is actually 100% related to our main topic today, which is this Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which is an absolute violation of your freedom of speech. Now, I'd like to point out a couple things, some of which I already pointed out in the introduction today. Number one, first off, I'm a nationalist for all nations. Obviously, most strongly an American nationalist because I'm American, but I believe every ethnos has the right to self-determination and self-governance in their historic homeland. That is a deeply held belief of mine, and it applies even to situations that some of y'all might think is a little weird, like the Native Hawaiians or Native Americans or the Scots or so on and so forth, right? That also applies to the Jews. I am definitely a Zionist, and frankly, it does not apply to the Palestinians because there's no such culture as Palestine. It's not a thing. They're an Arab culture. They're most genetically and culturally linked with the Jordanian people, in fact, almost directly. They didn't start existing until 1948, and that was only as a result of the establishment of the state of Israel. They're not a genuine culture group. That's not me saying that the people themselves deserve to be punished or anything like that. I think they're Jordanian, and the Jordanian government should take care of them. But they have no historic right or claim to the land of Israel, to Jerusalem, to Judea and Samaria, that the media commonly calls the West Bank, wrongfully so, to the Gaza Strip, so on and so forth, right? So I'm not only a Zionist, but I'm a rather extreme, quote-unquote, Zionist in that regard, just as I am with all other nations. So that's the first thing I want to get straight here. This is not an anti-Israel piece, okay? The second thing I want to get straight here is I am deeply concerned with the rising wave of anti-Semitism in Europe and in the United States of America. It is both right and left. It is both black and white. It is both Jew and Muslim, and we can throw atheist on there as well, and it's a problem. It is absolutely 100% a problem. We can see that in Columbia University. We can see that in the popularity of Andrew Tate and Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens and Kanye West. And I mean Kanye West as a political speaker because obviously he was popular as a rap artist before any of this took place. We can see that in the number of even well-meaning Christians online who are getting mad at people like myself and Dr. Michael Brown for going after these guys, and so on and so forth. So we can see that there's a problem here, and it's a problem that we as a society do need to fix, not via law, because some things can be fixed by going for the heart, not going for the legislature, right? But at any rate, it is a deep concern of mine. And the third thing I want to make perfectly clear is, as I've said to you guys numerous times, I take an awful lot of pride in the fact that I have Jewish heritage. I love it. It's awesome. It's one of my favorite things about the blessings that God has given me. I celebrate Jewish holidays. I speak Hebrew. It's, everybody has their the heritage that they find most appealing to themselves. And while I'm certainly very proud of my Scottish heritage as well, the Jewish one has always been the one that stuck with me the most, right? And mainly because I knew my grandpa Schubert. I didn't know my on my grandpa Pop's side, I didn't know his grandpa Arthur, who was from Scotland, but I knew my grandpa Schubert, who came over here from Germany. And for the longest time, so many of us thought that was the end of the story, that he was just German. Turns out he doesn't have an ounce of German blood in him, right? So it's a very cool thing for me. Why do I make those caveats? Well, because when it's not as if I'm some anti-Semite who's mad that I can't say some things at this point, which, for the record, the bill is not quite, the bill wouldn't do anything against me if I were to say stuff here online anyway. But nevertheless, that's not why I hate the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. No, I hate the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act because I'm a constitutionalist and a conservative and a traditionalist, and it's a huge, massive violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution. But the point I want to get at before we get to the article here today is it's also very stupid, okay? It's very dumb. There is a group of people out there, both left and right, who are convinced to their core that the Jewish people and the state of Israel control the American government. Now, that is not true. It's not even close to true. It is true that there's a rather large super PAC in AIPAC, right? And that it's I think American Alliance or American Israeli Alliance or something like that. I don't exactly remember what the acronym stands for, but nevertheless, they are large, they are powerful, they are wealthy. They support a lot of the politicians that sit in office. That is true. That's true of any super PAC. It just so happens that this super PAC has a lot more people who agree with it than others, and therefore their politicians tend to get elected more than others. The vast majority of American people are supporters of the state of Israel, both left and right. Okay? So, but the vast majority of our congressmen are not Jewish. The vast majority of our senators are not Jewish. We've never had a Jewish president. To the best of my knowledge, we've never had a Jewish vice president. I'm not sure how many Jewish members of the cabinet we've had, but I know it's not very much. And really, it's the United States that tells Israel what to do. It may not seem like it right now, but I can assure you it is still the case right now, even with a weak and feckling president such as Joe Biden. If you want evidence of that, Israel was going to have a massive retaliatory strike against Iran and instead opted for a very limited strike that killed absolutely no one and was little more than a threat, really, than anything else. Why? Because the United States said, we will not support you if you go to war with Iran. Okay? So even under weak and feckling, semi-sapient bullet-pudding Joe Biden, we still have control over what Israel does. Okay? It's the other way around. It's not the way that the anti-Semite thinks it is. It is very much the case that when we say jump, Israel says how high and why, because we give them $30 billion a year. They would very much like to have that $30 billion a year, right? There's plenty of examples of this. One of the most famous is when they tried to strike the nuclear facilities of Iran back in the 80s. I think it was Iran. It might have been Iraq. Either way, it doesn't matter. Ronald Reagan said, hey, don't do that. And Israel said, okay, fine, we won't do that. Even though that was causing Israel to be under greater threat from these Islamist terrorist nations, right? Didn't matter because Big Daddy government said, you don't get to do that. And so Israel, in fact, didn't do that. And of course, we can see it with the embassies. Why does Jerusalem need to be recognized by the United States in order for it to be considered a legitimate capital of Israel? Because Israel's big dog, or excuse me, America is big dog, right? Why does it matter if America recognizes the Golan Heights if they annex it? Because America's big dog. So on and so forth, right? So it's actually the other way around, that we control Israel. Israel does not control us. However, if you have a group of people, most of whom harbor deeply anti-Semitic views, who are telling you, I believe Israel controls the United States government. I believe that the Jewish people control the world, control the media, control the United States government. Do you know what's an excellent way to make them feel like they've been proven right? To make it illegal in some capacity to say Jews control the United States government or Israel controls the United States government. If all of a sudden there was a massive wave of people saying Jews control the United States government, and then the United States government passes a law that says you cannot say, at least in some capacity, Jews control the United States government, that massive wave feels validated. Obviously, I shouldn't have to explain this to people who have been sitting in Congress for 5, 10, 15, 20, 35 years, people with law degrees, people who should know the Constitution frontwards and backwards, okay? These should be, allegedly, intelligent people, members of our elite ruling class, okay? I shouldn't have to explain this to them, and it's not a nefarious thing. I know a lot of people want to go, oh, what if it's a conspiracy? No, it's not. They're just dumb. Okay, the United States government is dumb, just like every other government on this planet is dumb. If for some reason we as a species, we as a bunch of sapient monkeys, which I don't actually believe, but we act like it quite a bit, okay? We as a bunch of sapient monkeys like to go around and elect the absolute stupidest. We don't elect the cream of the crop. We elect the burned milk at the bottom when you've been heating up that milk in a saucepan, okay? And it's ridiculous that we continuously we continuously find ourselves in this kind of a situation. However, the point is, you do not, under any circumstances, do something like what you're doing right now, not only because it violates the United States Constitution, which you're going to get to, but because you're validating the disgusting opinions of the people who you're trying to attack. Obviously, right? Like imagine there was, during the JFK, and by the way, this actually did happen, but I'll try to put it in front of your guys' faces because many of you guys are probably younger than the JFK assassination. I certainly am, obviously, right? Imagine, if you will, that when JFK was assassinated, you had a bunch of people coming around saying, hey, I think the government did it. I think there was an assassin on the grassy knoll. I think it might have been the mob. I think it's something more complex than what we're being told with the lone gunman Lee Harvey Oswald story, okay? And the government decided, we're going to cover up the investigation. We're going to arrest the people who say this, and we're going to tell people it's actually illegal to question this investigation. Do you think those people would become more or less convinced that JFK was whacked by the government at that point? Obviously, it would be more, duh, right? Like, how is it that we have to explain this to adults? People who are supposed to be at least in the medium range of IQ between 90 and 110, right? It's obvious. It's obvious to anybody with a functioning brain. In fact, it's obvious to anybody with a non-functioning brain. It's one of those things that's that obvious, right? If you brought Forrest Gump up here and the dude from Rain Man, and you asked him this question, they'd agree with me. And if you brought in, just in case you know, some people are going to agree with you. All right, well, if you want to bring up Albert Einstein up here, he'd agree with me also, right? It's stupid. It's stupid. This is the way people think. And by the way, rightfully so. I don't think there is a giant Jewish conspiracy to control the United States government. However, often when there's smoke, there's fire. Right now, y'all are creating a lot of smoke. It happens to be from bulbous cigars and not an actual campfire, but nevertheless, you know, that this is just one of the dumbest things I've ever seen passed through Congress. It completely validates everything that the Columbia protesters, that the Cornel Wests and Nick Fuenteses of the world are saying, and it only makes them stronger, quite frankly. And on top of that, it's a violation of the United States Constitution, which is what we're going to get to next. So, my first article, which may end up being my only article, depending on how much time we have. What is the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act? Now, this is not going to be us reading through the whole thing. That's going to be for a special report at some point in the future. But this is an article from U.S. News and World Report. It was originally written by a woman by the name of Anita Mather Ashton. And it says, the controversy surrounding the anti-Semitism bill explained. Okay, the controversy surrounding the anti-Semitism bill explained. So, the bill, which was passed by the House, and at this point has now been passed by the Senate, by the way. By the way, this is May the 9th, 2024, if I didn't say that already. This article was published on May the 7th. So we are now living in the future where this actually has been, what's the word I'm looking for? Passed through the Senate, sorry. So we'll see if Biden ends up vetoing it. He won't. I'm just going to predict the future for you. The bill, which was passed by the House, codifies a federal definition of anti-Semitism and has drawn criticism from both sides of the aisle. It has also been supported, by the way, by both sides of the aisle. So there's that to consider as well. A bill that would codify the definition of anti-Semitism in response to unrest on university campuses is making its way through the Senate, albeit slowly and not without controversy. Despite overwhelming support for the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act in the House, where it passed last week on a 320-91 vote, the bill drew criticism from both sides of the aisle, while Republicans saying it could outlaw Christian biblical teaching, and some Democrats saying it infringes on free speech. Both of those, I think, are legitimate concerns. Now, it is important to note, as we'll figure out when we do this special report later on, which hopefully, like I said, Lord willing, we're going to be posting that next Wednesday, which I believe will be May the 15th, but I digress. The bill does not straight up outlaw these things as much as it kind of outlaws them on campus. It demands that the Department of Education take a certain definition of anti-Semitism, right? So that obviously means on college campuses and in high schools and stuff like that, this bill would have its strongest effect. Not necessarily on YouTube or in day-to-day speech. That does not make it any less a violation of freedom of speech. And I know some people would like, because people have said, well, what's the difference between this and, a bunch of people called for Columbia to expel students for their anti-Semitic protests. And the difference is, and I'm actually baffled I have to explain this sort of thing, but, unfortunately, not a lot of people know, what exactly colleges are and what they do and what constitutes a violation of free speech and stuff like that. If you have a private institution like Columbia University, or like your local restaurant, or your local bowling club, or something like that, right? They actually do have a right. They're not the government. In fact, they're not even a state or local government. They actually do have the right to police who can and cannot participate in their organization, right? Whether that be as an employee or as a partaker in the product, whatever that product happens to be, or as a member in the case of a bowling club, right? They do have the right to say, these are our rules, you violated our rules, you're fired, you're out, you're banished, whatever, right? Now, whether or not they should is, of course, a different conversation, and in many instances, it's probably a case-by-case conversation. I, for one, think that students harassing other students in Columbia should at the least warrant some disciplinary action, even if it's not necessarily expulsion on the first go-around. That being said, if that's what Columbia wants to do, they have a right. And if they want to do something else, they have a right. And if they want to do nothing, they have a right. It's their call, right? The United States government has a right to, for example, withhold federal funding from them if they choose to do something like that. But they don't have a right to tell them, you have to let these students protest, or otherwise you have to kick these students out of the school for protesting, right? So that's where this distinction is going to be made, right? Your local bowling club, your local university, your local restaurant, your local barbershop, your local whatever, they have, your local church, whatever, right? They have a right to police their ranks on the basis of speech. Obviously, you're not going to, if you have black members of your bowling club, you're not going to allow somebody to show up to your bowling club and start yelling the N-word. Or obviously, if you're a Christian church and you have a deep commitment to biblical value, you're not going to hire a pastor who's a homosexual, right? Obviously, if you're in a men's club, then there's no women involved, so on and so forth, right? You have a right to do that. The federal government, and quite frankly, the state government, at least in most instances, does not have a right to police your speech in this manner. Private institutions have a right to do that. Private individuals have a right to do that. The government does not have the right to do that. And also a little caveat of our own American law, neither do public forums, which is why there's such a hubbub about YouTube and Twitter and all these other guys who police free speech. They're considered to be public platforms, and therefore they should not be policing free speech according to the United States law, which is a law the United States courts don't seem to want to enforce, but I digress on that. So that's where we have a problem here, right? And it is absolutely a violation that the left and right are both right on this, at least those members of the left and right who have criticized this bill. It is absolutely a freedom of speech issue. Okay, you do have a right to criticize the state of Israel, to call it a racist colonial settler state. You're wrong about that. However, you have a right to say it, right? You have a right to say that the state of Israel shouldn't exist. And in fact, you even have a right to say things that are pretty messed up, like drawing caricatures of Jews and denying the Holocaust and stuff like that. I think it's disgusting. I think that it is absolutely something that we who are trying to spread knowledge and truth should combat, in the sense that we are debating these issues, debunking these issues, debunking these talking points, right? We should make sure it is known when people hold these kinds of views, hey, you're wrong. There's absolutely no leg you can stand on. And hopefully this goes the way of flat earth, where a fringe group of people who can't be convinced believe it's sure. But nevertheless, the vast majority of the world recognizes it's dumb. That's the way you should combat these things in the public forum, right? But you do have a right to say those things. Nobody should be putting you in prison or threatening you with physical harm because you have said those things, right? So that's one thing that I want to get very clear. This is absolutely a violation of free speech. As far as making certain elements of the New Testament illegal, now remember again, this is only going to apply to campuses, at least to the best of my understanding. But, there are passages in the Bible which speak about the Jews killing Jesus quite blatantly and explicitly. Now, of course, there are anti-Semitic folks who try to run with that without realizing the guy writing those words was also Jewish, whether that be John or Paul or Peter. They're all Jewish, right? Jesus was Jewish, obviously, right? The God of Israel is the God of the Bible. The Bible is actually known as the Tanakh, at least the Old Testament is, in Hebrew, which is obviously a Hebrew word. It's a Hebrew language that it was written in, right? And so when these people say the Jews, like there's some nebulous group killed the Messiah, that's obviously wrong. First off, the Jews alive today weren't alive then, obviously. Second off, it wasn't every single Jew who did it. So that's certainly true. And of course, a vast plurality of Jews did actually end up becoming Christians during the first century. And there's still Jewish Christians to this day, 20,000 in Israel. There's also about 40,000 here in America. So there is that caveat to be made. However, obviously, those people who are using religion in that way have, just the same as the other guys, they have a right to say what they're going to say, and we should be combating them with words, right? Secondly, the New Testament does have passages that their go-to passages for these anti-Semitic folk that do say, quote, the Jews, because the Bible and, in fact, most ancient literature talks in a corporate way, right? So the nation of Israel rejects Messiah according to the Bible. And so that the way it describes it is just Israel. Obviously, Paul is an Israelite. So he's not saying each individual Jew. And if you have a problem with what I'm saying right now, read Romans 9 through 11, specifically 11. But nevertheless, it is true that because the Bible speaks in this corporate way, as all ancient literature does, it does say things like Israel rejected its Messiah, or that the Jews killed Jesus. Now, of course, it says that about other nations as well, which people don't tend to point at. Like it talks about how I believe it's is it Corinthian? It might be Thessalonica too. But one of these group of Greek Christians, it compares to Jewish Christians in that the nation itself rejected and is persecuting them, but they themselves have kept the faith in Christ, right? So, but I'm getting on a tangent there because the point is, you can easily see how, especially if a particularly sensitive liberal guy comes into power, which, by the way, they're already in it. You could definitely see how somebody could just listen to somebody non-anti-Semitic, just merely preaching words of scripture on a college campus, and they come across one of these verses and they say it out loud and they end up finding themselves in legal trouble. That's certainly possible. So the right is also correct in having this particular objection. Moving on, what does the anti-Semitism bill say? Remember, we'll be reading it in full, Lord willing, on a special report next Wednesday. The legislation would, for the first time, enshrine a definition of anti-Semitism into federal law by adopting wording settled upon, in 2016 by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, a group of 35 member countries that includes the United States and Israel. The definition could then be used for enforcement of federal anti-discrimination laws on campus. Notice there, federal anti-discrimination laws on campus. It is important to note that while this is still a violation of free speech, no doubt, there are people who are pretending like you and I are going to be arrested if we say stuff on the street for that is violating the definition here of anti-Semitism that they've given, and that's just simply not the case. So, and this is a consistent problem we see in the modern world, right? It's like you have a legitimately bad thing or a legitimately good thing, and then the side that supports it or rejects it or whatever, they just completely over-exaggerate the positives or negatives of it in such a way that it now becomes false information. So it is important for us to note this is in regards to federal anti-discrimination laws. It is not in regards to what you and I can say on the street, as I've already said, right? The intergovernmental organization founded in 1998 to increase and promote education and research, education, research, and awareness related to the Holocaust, adopted legally non-binding, language in 2016 that defines anti-Semitism as, quote, a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews, end quote. Examples of the definition's application include, quote, accusing Jews as a people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing committed by a single Jewish person or group, and making dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews, such as the power of Jews as a collective, right? So, obviously, that is a violation of many of the things that people who shouldn't, like I said, people shouldn't believe these things. We should combat these things, but do they have a right to believe these things? Of course they do. Of course they do. It's the United States of America. Freedom of speech, bro. And that shouldn't be controversial. And by the way, I'm not the only Jewish guy who's out here saying these kinds of things, just for the record, right? Ben Shapiro has come out against these. Andrew Klavan has come out against these. Jerry Nadler has come out against this bill. I believe Dr. Michael Brown came out against this bill, if I remember correctly. There are very many Jewish leaders, both on the left and the right and in the center, who are very, very much opposed to this bill and should be, of course. The definition also includes denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, claiming that Israel's existence is a racist endeavor, and drawing comparisons between current Israeli policy and Nazi policy, which again, that invalidates, that basically means they've made it ineffective. Sorry, let me make sure I'm wording this. This effectively makes it illegal on college campuses, at least, to use the common talking points of the pro-Palestinian cause. Okay, and again, I just want to keep caveating this. I am not pro-Palestinian under any stretch of the imagination. They started the war. They should be bombed into smithereens, Hamas at least, right? Obviously, the women and children should not. They should be destroyed, in fact, Hamas. And I don't think that there's such a thing as a Palestinian culture. I don't think there's such a thing as a Palestinian nation. I don't think there's such a thing as Palestinian history. I don't think there's such a thing as a right to Palestinian self-determination, right? I refer to them as Judea and Samaria and not the West Bank rather deliberately. It's because it's Jewish land, okay? So this is not some bleeding heart liberal getting on a soapbox talking about, well, you're just telling me that I can't. No. But I don't have to support these people to support their right to free speech. And the fact of the matter is, Israel as a racist settler state with Nazi-esque policy, that is the majority of their talking point right there. And you've effectively said you're not allowed to say it on a college campus, which is bogus. You should not be allowed to do that. How did the bill come to be? The bill was introduced by Republican Representative Mike Lawler of New York and Democratic Representative Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey in response to the growing pro-Palestinian protest on campuses and allegations of anti-Semitism springing up from them. Quote, Right now, without a clear definition of anti-Semitism, the Department of Education and college administrators are having trouble discerning whether conduct is anti-Semitic or not, whether the activity we're seeing crosses the line into anti-Semitic harassment, end quote, Lawler said during a House floor speech before its passage. The bill goes further than an executive order from President Donald Trump signed in 2019 that made Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act applicable to anti-Semitic acts. The order suggests the alliance's definition be considered by those enforcing Title V, Title IV, excuse me, which bans discrimination based on race, color, or national origin in programs and activities like colleges and universities that receive federal funding. Which, to be fair, that law was already on the books, so you didn't need a new law. The order also pointed to the group's examples of anti-Semitism. The new legislation comes 8 years after the Senate passed the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act of 2016. This act requires the Education Department, to consider the State Department's definition of anti-Semitism when deciding whether federal anti-discrimination laws have been violated. The department's guiding language is a version of the working definition of anti-Semitism that was issued in 2005 by the European Center on Racism and Xenophobia. And look, here's the thing about this, right? The thing that makes this such a weird situation, as many of our situations in modern politics are, is the local, as I already said, the local university has every right to say we're going to kick these people out or otherwise give them some sort of disciplinary action because what they are doing, what they are saying, what they are promoting does not align with the values we have as a university. They have every right to do that. We can debate about whether or not they should do that, but you shouldn't smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day. You still have a legal right to do it. You shouldn't go eat Big Macs every single meal, but you still have a legal right to do it. You shouldn't, be walking around calling people the N-word, but you have a legal right to do it. And by the way, that just on a side note, we as a society need to learn how to separate between things that you are morally prohibited from doing and things which you are legally prohibited from doing. Okay? Morally, there are certain things which you should not, do, that legally you certainly can do. And I know some people like to disagree with me on that. That's fine. I mean, you're entitled to your opinion, but you're wrong. Unless you want us to start policing Big Mac eating and alcohol drinking and smoking cigarettes and whether or not people can have one-night stands and so on and so forth, then you know what? I mean, if that's the kind of world you want to live in, then there you go, I guess. But nevertheless, obviously, there are things which are heart issues, which are reflective of an immoral person that you should not do if you are a moral person, that they are wrong to do, which nevertheless you do have a legal right to do, not only under the United States Constitution, but just under the tradition of the rights of man that we have inherited from our forefathers, right? At any rate, the university has every right to kick these people off of the campus, to expel them, to give them some other disciplinary action like suspension or a fine or what have you. They have every right to do that. And then we could all debate about whether or not they should do it, but they have at least the right to do it. Nobody's rights have been violated if that's what they do. Also, the federal government, which frankly shouldn't be funding universities anyway, but I digress, the federal government does have the right to withhold funding because they don't like the things that are going. And then the university at that point, they can just make a choice. Do we want to allow what's going on to continue to go on in return for federal funding, or do we not? Because at that point, you're basically negotiating a contract with the federal government, right? That's perfectly fine. What the federal government does not have the right to do is pass a law that says you're violating this, that, and the third, and therefore that now the administration of the local university now says, okay, look, maybe we don't necessarily have a problem with what you did, but pass the buck on to the United States federal government. They have a problem with what you did, and so now you may potentially find yourself in a little bit of legal hot water at a minimum, and also our hand is kind of forced you now expelled from the school, right? That's not okay. And I understand the line there is fine, but if you actually think about it, it's really not, right? There is a difference between Columbia University expelling somebody because Columbia University wants to do so, and Columbia University expelling somebody because the United States government forced them to do so. You see what I'm saying? Like, those are two very different things. One of those is a university and the people who run that university exercising their own rights to free assembly and free association. The other one is the United States government dictating what is and is not acceptable conduct on campus. You see what I mean? Those are two, the line may seem thin at first, but if you actually look at it closely, you'll realize it's written in bright red Sharpie, right? Those are two vastly different things, and the latter of which, the federal government saying you should do the X, Y, and Z, is very much a violation of your freedom. Anyways, a spokesperson for the Anti-Defamation League, an international Jewish non-governmental organization and advocacy group based in New York, said in a statement that the group supports the act, quote, which reinforces the use of the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism in addressing campus harassment and discrimination, in line with policy that has been in effect over the last two presidential administrations, end quote, which, to be fair, is a part that everybody seems to be forgetting about this. The move to pass the bill is just one part in a series of planned responses from Republicans intending to address the unrest that has emerged from the protests. Other responses include threatening to rescind federal funding. That was the right choice, by the way. That's what they should have done. For universities perceived as not adequately cracking down on the demonstrations, because, like I said, at that point, then the university can just make a decision for itself. Do we value are allowing the students to say what they want to say more, or do we value the money we get from the federal government more? And frankly, I don't think the federal government should be funding universities like Columbia anyway. It's a private institution. Anyways, deporting foreign students involved in the activities, which, of course, they should be deported anyhow, and holding hearings with government law enforcement and administration officials, which is obviously a problem. The bill's text quickly drew criticism from several Republicans, who quickly defected over the idea that the definition would outlaw some parts of the Bible. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia said she opposed it because, quote, it could convict Christians of anti-Semitism for believing the gospel that says Jesus was handed over to Herod to be crucified by the Jews, end quote. Notably, the proposed legislation is civil, so criminal conviction is not possible, which is the thing I've been trying to tell you guys here so much, right? This has nothing to do with whether or not you and I can walk down the street and say things, right? There's everything to do with whether or not you can say things on campus, and any way you would find at any point that you found yourself in legal hot water because of this bill, it would A, have to be because you're on campus, and B, not involve criminal charges. So it is important that we understand the bill as it is and not as people want it to be. Similarly, Representative Matt Gaetz, who is a sexual predator, I might add, of Florida, called the bill, quote, a ridiculous hate speech bill, end quote. He added that while anti-Semitism is wrong, quote, this legislation is written about without regard for the Constitution, common sense, or even the common understanding of the meaning of words, end quote, which, to be fair, sexual predator or not, he's right about that. He just shouldn't be in Congress and should probably be in prison, but that's another story. He maintained that one of the, quote, contemporary examples of anti-Semitism included in the definition is claims of Jews killing Jesus, adding that the Bible is clear, there is no myth or controversy on this, end quote. And of course, that's very true. It's also very clear that the Romans did it, in case somebody wants to say, no, it wasn't the Jews, it was the Romans. It was both. That's very obvious. Just read the text for yourself. I mean, it's not complicated. Anyways, the Anti-Defamation League considers the centuries-old belief that Jesus was killed by Jews to be an anti-Semitic myth used to justify violence against the Jewish people, because of course they do. The ADL is a completely worthless organization, for the record. The Catholic Church has also attempted to dispel the idea, with former Pope Benedict XVI saying in a 2011 book that there was no basis in Scripture for the belief that Jews as a whole were responsible for the death of Jesus. And for the record, that's true. And I really wish people were better at critical thinking, because there is a difference between the Jews killed Jesus in so much as you're speaking corporately, the nation as a whole rejected him, and the people, generally speaking, wanted him executed at that point in time. That's one thing. To then say Jewish people are responsible for Jesus's death, in the sense that all Jewish people are responsible for Jesus's death, is obviously a different claim. And we know that's a different claim because the people who wrote the latter were Jewish. John, Peter, Paul, Matthew, James, Jesus himself. They're all Jews. All the writers of the Bible are Jews, every single one of them. And almost every single character in the Bible, character, quote unquote, obviously these are historical figures, but are also Jews. So obviously there's a separation between, generally speaking, the nation of Israel rejected Jesus and all Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus. Those are different things, obviously, right? However, the idea has quickly spread in the far-right community. Charlie Kirk and Tucker Carlson are not far-right, and anybody who thinks they are is an idiot. But anyways, with Charlie Kirk, a Republican activist, asking rhetorically on social media, quote, did the House of Representatives just make parts of the Bible illegal, end quote. Conservative commentator Tucker Carlson responded saying yes, and the New Testament. Caveats that we've already given, so we're going to move forward. Other hard right opponents of the bill include Representative Lauren Boebert, who is a absolute fraud. I can't believe. I hate that people like her and Matt Gaetz have to represent my side. Like, go away. You're making this so much more difficult. I guess, whatever. They have a right to do whatever they want. As long as it's not violating the law, right? Representative Anna Paulina Luna of Florida, Representative Chip Roy of Texas, Representative Paul Gosar of Arizona, and Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona. By the way, none of these guys are hard right, including Lauren Boebert. I don't like Lauren Boebert for completely different reasons, but she's certainly not hard right. That is just nonsense. The bill text also drew sharp criticism from some Democrats who argued it is too broad and infringes on free speech rights, which is true. 70 Democrats voted against the bill in the House along with 21 Republicans. Representative Jerry Nadler of New York, a Jewish lawmaker who describes himself as a deeply committed Zionist, urged his colleagues to vote against the misguided bill because it threatens to chill constitutionally protected speech. He's right about that, by the way. He's wrong about most things. Jerry Nadler is not a wise individual most of the time, but he is right about this. And again, he's Jewish and a Zionist. Okay, so, and I believe he's also religiously Jewish, if I remember correctly. So it's not as if he has some nefarious agenda to try and get this bill revoked. He, like me, like Ben Shapiro, is saying, look, we may disagree with these things, but you do not have a right to pass this bill. It violates the Constitution. That much is obvious. And if the courts do their job well, they will strike this law down. Quote, speech that is critical of Israel alone does not constitute unlawful discrimination, which is true. By encompassing purely political speech about Israel into Title VI ambit, the bill sweeps too broadly, end quote, again, true. He opted to vote against it. He was joined by Democratic Representative, I'm so going to pronounce this wrong, I'm sorry, Jake Auchincloss, maybe, of Massachusetts, who said in a statement that he didn't support it because he believed it to be unconstitutional. Quote, the IHRA's definition of anti-Semitism is a critical tool for the federal government that the Department of Education already uses to understand and address anti-Semitism. But as the foundation, and again, that actually is not a problem. It's when you put that into law that you have a problem. But as the foundation of individual rights and expression is pervasively argued, and as even the author of the IHRA has asserted himself, codifying IHRA as the only definition for Title VI investigations will unconstitutionally constrain academic freedom. And so on and so forth. Other guys talking about how they don't really like this bill. Unfortunately, I'm running short on time, so we're going to have to end the conversation there. The point here is, friends, that the United States government is once again not letting a good crisis go to waste. They do this all the time. Y'all remember, maybe many of you probably don't remember, because if you're my age or even just a little bit older, and of course, obviously younger, then you don't have really any recollection of 9/11, right? We live in a post 9/11 world. I was born in 1998, so I was 3 when it happened. I don't recall that at all, and my entire life has been, at least most of it, the post 9/11 world, right? And as soon as 9/11 happened, which was a tragedy, which was terrible, it was awful that 3,000 Americans lost their lives in such a cold-blooded and ruthless attack. And obviously, the people responsible for that deserved to be bombed into smithereens without remorse and without mercy. Okay? However, the United States government used that as an excuse to pass the USA Patriot Act so that they could monitor our phone calls and emails and other such digital communications without a warrant, right? They passed the Real ID Act, which is the reason we have star cards now. It took a while for that to get implemented, but nevertheless, they passed that act as well. They strengthened the National Security Agency, or NSA, and of course, Edward Snowden in 2014 revealed how bad that had gotten. By the way, Edward Snowden still deserves to be pardoned. I hope nobody's forgot about that. Although, who am I kidding? Of course you have. They obviously strengthened the TSA. I'm not sure if the TSA existed before that, but after that, they became a beast. And now, you're liable to get groped at the airport because some fat lady decided that she doesn't like that you have a certain amount of soap in your bag. Stupid. Obviously, they strengthened FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to such an extent that a lot of people consider them to be almost a paramilitary wing of the government, and so on and so forth. And there are so many other situations where this happens. Obviously, after the Sandy Hook shooting and after the 2017 shooting, Parkland, I believe it was, the government tried to pass anti-gun legislation. After the Charlottesville, not Charleston, the Charlottesville riot, my apologies. Everybody decided, oh, hey, this is a good opportunity to take down statues and to crack down on quote-unquote racism, which obviously some guys are legitimately racist, and a lot of the people labeled as racist aren't, obviously. And so on and so forth, right? These guys, they take these crises, for lack of a better term, and use them for their own nefarious means all the time. And this is just another example of it. They want to further restrict what you can and can't say on a college campus. Why? Because they're just not particularly fond of free speech. They want to control the things that you are allowed to say and not say, which is ridiculous, frankly. It's absolutely ridiculous. But it's also not going to change. It's also not going to change. And this is just the world we live in until the American people, and I'll be honest, I have very little faith that this is going to happen, until the American people wise up and decide, look, I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will fight tooth and nail for your right to say it, as Voltaire once famously did not say, but which everybody attributes to him anyway. Anyway, friends, we got to get out of here. So that's pretty much everything I got for you. If you liked this video, please remember to like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so, and hit the bell to get notified every time that we go live. Remember, you can follow us on various social media platforms. I am on Gab, Twitter, Facebook, Minds, MeWe, etc. You can find all of those in the link in the description once I actually get a description set up, because I'm terrible about getting those set up. Also, please remember to follow us on the Rumble account. And remember, you can financially contribute to what we do here if you appreciate the journalism that we're giving to you guys, if you appreciate this as a talk show, either by subscribing to the Patreon or by giving a one-time donation to our PayPal. If you subscribe to the Patreon, then I do actually have a blog there that you will also be able to follow, posted bi-weekly as well. So, shalom, gents. Want to remind you, of course, to stay vigilant and think like a Neanderthal. And I want to ask you guys the question: in the face of Armageddon, will you compromise?